So good evening. I think we are all in the same time zone, Erëmirë, Marko, Srdian, and we can start our conversation, our debate on hope and the Balkans. This is the Festival of Hope, and we are talking about the Balkans. Of course, this automatically means that we are going to talk about the lack of hope. That would be our topic. But before that, I sent you a little text, which sounds horribly complicated, but in fact, it explains what happened to my generation, considering, let's say, the leading, the ruling, the main literary and artistic theories in the last 40 years. And what happened to my generation was that we accepted with lots of passion and lots of heart the new theories in the 70s and 80s, which were pointing to the arbitrary of writing and creating and separating the artist and his work and giving way to many interpretations, which are all, let's say, equally legitimate, but in fact, depending on the strength of the theory behind them and so on. And that helped us very much, at least in this part of the world, in the Balkans, to get out smoothly from the ideological frameworks that we had on our heads that was prevailing. And by doing so, we were free to wander into the theoretical wonder world, which we did in the Balkans with, again, lots of energy and lots of force. And then suddenly, during the Yugoslav war, we had to rethink that position and to think about the relation between the author, his responsibility for the words. We had to think something unthinkable before, and this is the relation between the words and the deeds. And is there any? And now we know, yes, there is. So it's a completely different, it's a bipolar situation, which could have made us crazy, but it didn't, I hope. So my first question would be something like this: the status of the truth, the status of the art and especially writing, the status of visual and the lie and how they cope. And of course, one of the most poisonous questions that is bonding us in a very horrible way, and this is the question about extremely obscene common sense instead of truth. And how your generation and yourself in your context in the Balkans react to that? So Erëmirë, you would be the first. Please tell us about it.
Oh God, thank you for giving me the floor. Although quite daunting to take it. I'm daunted by the task. I don't know, my generation, how it approaches the aftermath of the war has been quite, I mean, of course, you can imagine it was difficult, mostly because when the society somehow is pulled apart and there's no cohesive understanding of it, and you have to rebuild it. You have to rebuild the political space, and you have to build the cultural sphere, and you have to build everything from the scratch, and that happens within your lifetime, your lifespan. It's not something that is transmitted to you from another generation, but it's actually you are the vehicle through which that world is rebuilt. As for, so I don't know, it was quite difficult to relate to it for quite some time, and it came with a lot of rejection. Most of all, we rejected Yugoslavia, and then we rejected the certain histories of the war, and then it comes with a lot of cultural renegotiation of values. Not that they are like absolute or we know what they are, but there's a constant negotiation of what you take back from that past, what you decide to recover, and what you decide to rehabilitate in some way. So the question of truth was not as, it's big and it's underlying, but it's not big in the public discourse. because it's hurtful in many ways. It was hurtful to be in the 90s under oppression, and it was hurtful not to have so much visibility, and then having that to deal with that's another big question, how to face your own lack of political agency within that 90s, and then the war, and then the whole process of peace building, which is another story, and it pushes forward some new formats of nation conceptualization and so on and so forth. So I think the production as well was very much responding to it. Cultural production, I mean, be it visual arts or literature. It was reflecting on it, but always suffering the lack of proper education, because the education as well suffered through these years, especially under occupation, which was totally displaced into the parallel system. And then after the war, it tried to pick up where that very same system left off. And until now, it's kind of struggling to also position itself in relation to the sciences. Because you said your generation picked up the 70s and all the capital history, literature, all those absolute values were kind of done away with, and we don't even feel secure whether we should take that legacy and move forward, or we should just build from local knowledge, or where do you stand in this huge discussion, which is, it's not just academic, but it's basically what do you elevate to the academic? What is that you take from your local experience? So yeah, this would be kind of an entry, but I can always go in any direction this discussion has to go.
We'll go on. So both Srđan and Marko, you are creators, literati, and theoreticians. So who would be the first to start? Marko?
Okay, hi, I'm gonna try to take the baton over. Okay, I would like to go back to this split, or the alleged split of the 70s. I assume that your focus was on a bit wider application of various sort of post-structural theories to various fields, where it was kind of where it could find its place and also where it couldn't. So these theories were, we need to admit now, I think they were stretched all overstretched and a bit over applied, and there definitely there has been negative consequences to it too. But I think that my notion would go to the direction that I don't really think that the actual split between the responsibility, public responsibility of the physical author actually ever happened. Okay, maybe we did apply some theoretical new paradigms to falsify the notion of split of the physical author and the implicit author, okay, one way to call it, of kind of materializing this ontological difference between the author in flesh and blood and the voice in the text. But I mean, even if we observe, I don't know, like a French intellectual Rive Gauche scene of the 50s and 60s, and then switch to the very notorious thinkers of post-structuralism, there has been a continuity of their personal responsibility in the public space, especially on the one hand in the Western societies, and on the other hand even more probably in the lager countries and in Yugoslavia as in a sort of in-between ground. So I would somehow reckon that I believe that I kind of can assume what were you aiming at, and definitely in generation of writers, thinkers, artists that kind of emerged in the 70s and early 80s. and then throughout the 80s. Of course, especially with Serbian postmodernism, we had similar things in Croatia too. It's quite easy historically see what were they opposing to and what means they were using to oppose with, and how these new theories kind of clicked with different agendas of theirs, like political, social, as well as artistic. But considering the general framework of especially our self-managing Yugoslav society, still as public figures, that was something else. There were their words in vivo, as physical persons, and in written text were still very well counted. I think the problem is that exactly at that time, certain figures of in all of more or less all republics of Yugoslavia, writers, intellectuals, artists, public figures, basically strengthen that link between them as physical and person and social actors and their artworks and theoretical works. They somehow became a sort of a floating signifiers of signs for a certain ideological background or an idea. And as the 80s and the 90s were approaching and proceeding, these signifiers became very petrified, very strong, and actually I think they were socially very significant. They definitely had a social weight. The problem is that ideological direction that some of the leading players were actually taking and representing was extremely dangerous, and it took us basically where we are now, because I think that we are not supposed to run from the, I mean, I can call it a fact from my point of view, that theoreticians, philosophers, historians, artists, writers especially, intellectuals, had an immense role in preparing the Yugoslav wars and in conceptualizing dismantling of Yugoslavia. So what we lived after that through so-called transition, and what are we living, most of us at least still now, is, I think, still there's a still very visible red thread to exactly position of intellectuals of that generation in question. And I mean, for me, this is extremely interesting to observe actually how this red line emerged and how can we read it today, and actually how, when we pull it today, basically, you know, the skeleton starts to fall from different closets on all of us.
Thank you, Marko, very much. And now, Srjan, what do you have to say?
So I guess I'm the oldest one. Now I'm 44 years old, and I'm some kind stuck in between of what was happening. Mm-hmm. I can clearly remember the world in the 80s, especially the world from the 80s. And Marko is in right when he's talking about some kind of authorities. Mm-hmm. Authors had certain authority. You cannot do such things right now. You cannot pretend that you're something you're not. Mm-hmm. So the author is not as dangerous as in the 80s, or not, especially in the beginning of the 90s. My generation witnessed decomposition of complete ideological system, of complete system of values. our values. Now it seems like something from prehistoric times. And I'm not, I'm not 90 years old. I am 44 years old. So when I'm listening to what he was speaking about, it's like he's speaking from prehistoric point of view, and this really is sad for my generation. It's sad to make some conclusion like this. Now we are into, area of total irresponsibility. You can do whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, you're in the field of billions of opinions, and we don't have any kind of authority, and we don't have an authority of truth. That's our basic problem right now, because even those most negative guys, Marko didn't name them, but we all know them. They had some kind of authority of truth from their point of view. It was quite simple to understand what they're talking about, what their ideological or theoretical aims are. And now we have much bigger problem than that one, because we cannot easily define the truth right now. And when we are talking about the hope, and I guess we are talking about the hope, we must reestablish the category of truth. Without that reestablishing, we are where we are, in a global concentration camp for a year. And I don't think that, I don't know which theory can save us from where we are right now. I really cannot imagine reconstruction of a world which we know in the 70s or 80s, even the world from the 90s. And that's one happy, or the only happy thing I can remember right now. We cannot reconstruct the world from the 90s, but I really don't know what we can do about the world we are living in right now.
Thank you, Marko, very much for this desperate position, which is very inspiring. I always wonder, how was it possible for people, for literati and artists in the 80s, which are swearing on postmodernism and complicated approaches to discourses and to expression, and how these people, many of these people, quite easily transgressed to a simplicist, a horrifyingly simplicist approach to creation, to simple ideas based on us, the collective, the interest of collective, and so on. How is it possible that these same people are still culturally alive, that they still create, and they are, well, we know they're simply conformists, but it was rather massive in Serbian and in Croatian literature, and even in the Slovenian there are traces, which is quite different from the Albanian cultural situation, which in this sense is, should I use the word pure, more pure, or at least it has the moral strength of the victim of everybody, the victim of racism, the victim of colonialism, the victim of war. So, Erëmirë, it's up to you to tell us something about it. Do you feel it that way? Do you feel the positive sign or not?
I mean, the way our local literature developed, like in the 80s, I think most of them went, I mean, I think it started even earlier. They were quite modern in their approach. I think they focused more on interiority, they approached themselves in more abstract terms, and that kind of poured down also in visual arts, because I think this is also the case in Croatia, that the poets and the visual artists were kind of circulating the same ideas more or less, and kind of simplifying them in the most minimal terms. But then I think what happened with us during the 90s was that although this type of literature was not politically threatening for the system or establishment or Milosevic regime, I think it still managed to make the literary scene more conserved and more afraid. And then what happens at the level of signification is that they become even more abstract, and the language is more coded. And now it's like a poetry within a poetry. It's like the literature within a literature. They're constantly they're aware as they write. They're aware that can backfire and turn into a weapon against them. So we did not grow much. Our literary scene did not experience any type of growth. It happened within these clusters, insulated circles, but I mean, we still suffer, our thinking still suffers because of that way of expression. The language became way poorer and more, I don't know, being more aware of itself and the dangers that it can produce for the authors themselves. So this was kind of that turn which we're trying to get out of it, how to express widely, but how to also find this voice that doesn't get locked within these symbolism that happened because of the fear in those times. I mean, there are voices, new ones, and this is changing, but it's definitely something that we're processing still, because it has left a mark in our culture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let me take on this point, which is extremely interesting, and I would then like to ask Marko, from what we heard from Erëmirë, it's so easy to be responsible today. We know exactly what is to be responsible and what we have to think about, and where the bad things are. There's no problem in confusing maps, not at all. So why the majority of the literati and of the cultural scene is not openly responsible and politically active?
Well, I would be very happy if the things were as you said. I mean, I can agree up to one extent. So I agree that it should be a kind of common sense that we kind of know how the things are. But I think that sadly, this is sadly, or maybe I'm not sure. Should I say sadly? But like, or do I mean it? But kind of things seems to be not so simple. At least that's how I see them. Because on the one hand, of course, we can talk about sheer opportunism, about like people figuring it all out and just, you know, clicking like in a Minesweeper game, just clicking the right dots or squares, and sometimes even kind of consciously exposing themselves, being very direct in order, you know, to kind of gain some kind of symbolical capital or whatever, but like kind of following quite neatly what's happening all around, like in the former Yugoslav space. I'm not so sure about it anymore. I keep stumbling on quotation marks, honest texts, analysis, interviews, out of which I cannot drive much of common sense out. And it seems to me that there is so much of misreading. And I'm not talking just about like this classical, already like familiar cluster of conspiracy theories and this kind of very straightforward mumbo jumbo. I'm talking about like a serious lack of political context, of political education, of structural thinking. In short, for instance, we are lacking some kind of Cartesian, not authority, and not the line, and not even the X, according to which we oriented or our orbits are formed upon. But we lack, I think, or one big segment of our cultural and literary field lacks this kind of sharp, contextual, not politically naive and ideologically conscious thinking. What actually scares me the most is that I kind of, it seems to me that I quite often detect complete lack of that. Somehow, it's maybe easier to, I think it's important to know your enemy. As Srjan said, like, in your question is also implying that 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was quite easy to, enemies were quite open, ideological strongholds were open, and certain public figures really operated as flags, as flagpoles. They were kind of leading the groups, the columns. Today, it's kind of way harder. It's kaleidoscopic. It's these things are this power network is really in a Foucaultian way. It's really scattered. So it's easy to I think to work with ones that you kind of can simply mark as opportunists or ideological opponent. But what happens when a personal analysis shows that at least, I mean, I'm playing with numbers, half of the entire participants actually doesn't seem to have a clue what are they talking about. I have to say that I'm quite scared about this 50%.
Marko, I noticed a huge shadow with huge wings of melancholy above your head. You were the most pessimistic in so many ways. But that's exactly why you perhaps have a more precise idea of hope. Or am I totally wrong?
well, I mean, I have to say that I really adopted one Gramsci's GNOME as a sort of my life motto. And I'm not kidding at all. I mean, of course, I'm always exaggerating, but Gramsci one beautifully said, I mean, Gramsci said a lot of beautiful and very precise, accurate things. But what I like specifically is that notion of his that pessimism of reason, but the optimism of will. And I really, you know, if we give up, if we give in to the pessimism of reason, then we ditch the fight. The lotta is not continua anymore. But you know, we need this optimism of will. But on the long run, it's very hard to stay optimist. And of course, this takes us in one arm of that definitely takes us to that melancholy of the left, which is not really progressive, and probably it's not really a hopeful notion. But we really need to work, you know, every day, small steps. We need to participate actively in this smaller and smaller world stock of hope.
Thank you, Marko, very much. Srđan, what about the blackbird and you?
As far as I remember, the first one was about those guys who entered the 90s in a new role.
Mhm.
I guess the oldest friend of mine is Philip David, and he's 80 years old. And he told me, not just for one time, about what was happening with Serbian literary scene in the very end of 80s, and about his surprising about certain authors, certain thinkers, certain philosophers, and how easy they adopted something that was completely on the other side. On the other side of their way of life in the end, not just on the other side of their way of writing, ideologically thinking, etc. And that is interesting question, because we had 45 years of so-called enlightenment, of as Marko said, some kind of progression, obvious progression. And in 2 or 3 years, we pushed us back in the Stone Age of ideology. 30 years after that, we had some discussions in Serbian literary scene about the major Serbian literary prize, and that discussion is not about it's not about the interpretation of texts, it's not about the critics, it's not about the values, it's about the Stone Age things, about the nationalism one more time. And that nationalism in 2021 is it should be grotesque for people with brains in normal state, and that is the literary subject number one in Serbia for a year. So we are not interpreting, we are pretending to adopt something that is completely insane. And we saw that 30 years ago. And I don't believe all those guys on the black side, on the dark side. They're all just stupid or badly educated. I guess that that has to have something with opportunism and with something Marko said, with some kind of obvious confusion. We in Serbia we had and we have certain European messages, problematic European messages. 10 years we are listening about our politic elites as a war criminal, as they are, definitely, most of them. And now Europe don't have a problem with the same guys. We have problem with them. So Marko is he's in right, because you don't know what to think about that. It's not clear who your enemy is in this moment. And that is really, really bad. And when we're thinking about those small steps I was talking about, it's nice, it's beautiful, it's some kind of romantic point of view, but I don't think we can change anything with our small, simple, wonderful, and nice and refined steps. That is a problem, and I don't know what should be the solution, because generation abyss, it's not generation gap, it's generation abyss. I'm working in a high school for 15 years, and what is happening with the first students born after 2000, and those are kids born with wireless internet, led me to idea that I am complete anachronism, that I don't have anything in common with them, and I'm not the oldest one in that school. So we are not speaking the same language. What we know, they don't want to know. They obviously, in this type of political context, they don't need to know. It's better for them not to know things we know. And I don't know their language. I cannot speak with them on their language. So it was easy in that type of situation to install the world of alternative facts, because everything is non-plausible. Everything is relevant, and in the same time completely irrelevant.
Thank you so much, Marko. You really push us even deeper into depression, but a very creative one. Well, you know, thinking about the right wing and how it is stupid, basically it's stupid, as you rightly said, and it's a shallow comfort. It doesn't help a lot, but defining is a good practice. I will say something that is considering all of us and our cultures, and the cultures that want to possess us and want to present us as theirs. And that is that in the Balkans, the practice of everyday life for centuries was, if you don't know several languages, you don't survive. If you don't translate, you don't survive. You don't exist if you are not multilingual. And at the same time, all the Balkan cultures have the same problem, that they are looked upon by major cultures of the West as something that is still material of colonial procedures, of despise, of ignorance, of lack of theorizing, of not understanding how deep the tradition of theorizing was there in the Balkans. So we do have the inner problem and the outer problem of translation, let's say, and of imposing ourselves. And the fact that we are speaking English at the moment in which Great Britain is not any longer member of the United Europe is something that is paradoxical for our generation. So how do we deal with this, Erëmirë?
The fact that we speak English, you mean? I don't know. I mean, there's always that indigenous moment in all of us, I guess, that we need, that we have the need to speak in our language, because we feel closer, I guess, to concepts, because we're translating ourselves all the time just to make ourselves better understood. But it's interesting because we're all being filtered through one single language to which we approach through reading. It's not like it comes from somewhere else, that we create knowledge in that language, but we filter it. And what comes on the other end, it's still, I don't know, we don't even have to, I think, be on the same, approach it in the same way. And what I actually appreciate, one of these post-colonial artifacts, let's put it that way, is that we can all contribute to reimagining this English and take agency within it to be producers of that language just as much, and decenter the center from where the language comes from. So I don't know. I guess that would be my approach. I still, there are ways, there are minor cultures which do speak a bit of English and a bit of their own language. And I always see those variations as very much claiming it. Because if some cultures don't manage to create their own autonomous culture within other larger cultures, and we are imposed to think in other languages, then that language just as much is ours, and we can be producers of it. So this Spanglish and Albanian English, whatever that is, it has to enjoy some sort of legitimacy just as much, because we are just always having to subordinate our ways of thinking under this larger language, which I think it became larger because we made it. The days in which that was a large language, as you said, they're gone. The empire is gone. So what do we do with its debris in a way? And I think we have to find power within it, and how we move with it further.
That's a wonderful way to think the diversity of languages and possibilities of translation. We might imagine the Balkans in which we have the Albanian year, the Croat year, the Macedonian year, Slovenian year, Serbian year, and then see how we do, how we work on it. And there are so many signs of, let's say, the new Yugoslav connection, the new possibility of reading the Balkans, which we didn't do for so many years. We are guilty, we are also guilty for that. So, well, we are approaching, of course, our time limit, but we have enough time for each of us to say something about, let's posit it this way, translation is also a huge part of hope, of possible hope. So, Marko, what would you say?
I have to say that when posed this way, also the future doesn't look super bright to me. I mean, it's very interesting listening to Erëmirë, considering that especially Kosovo Albanians basically jumped from the phase of being very strongly imposed with one colonial language, with Serbo-Croatian, to the basically overnight being switched totally to this global linguistical imperialism of English. But I don't think, I mean, it seems to me that this quotation marks small languages are, this difference is slowly, and even not so slowly, maybe dissolving, because like even like take German language with probably 100 million plus speakers, very rich language and powerful language, basically German elites, German top managers, they're forced to work in English. German bankers work in English. Even the German golden youth, the German elites are being more and more educated in English. Not to be mentioning like similar class from Arab countries or from wherever. So basically, we are having one kind of strictly classically bound linguistical imperialism, where lingua franca of today, English, is becoming class-wise also like an instrument of domination, because of course we can you know, have these mantras of multiculturalism, cultural exchange. Some governments invest loads of money into translations, cultural understanding. That's all nice. On the other hand, let's see our own courtyard. It's disgraceful how little we translate from Albanian. It's almost impossible to count 5 competent translators, not only literary. Also, like having in mind that philological faculty in Belgrade has a cathedra for Albanian language. Still, I mean, it's still ideological war, And I mean, you can see that plastically when if you follow what, for instance, Beton and Chandra Multimedia do together. If they're having an event in Belgrade, it's very probable that some guys with haircuts like Srdian and me would visit them, pay them a visit, and pay them also, send them to hospital. So I mean, but if we start, we still need to start somewhere. Of course, like it's fighting like windmills now. It seems like fighting windmills. Like if you try to attack this super class bound structure of linguistic imperialism, but where we can fight and we can actually produce a difference, and where our voice, I mean, I'm even saying like particularly of us sitting like around these screens, there are many battles that we are actually able to fight, and we need to be fighting them, because we are the ones, and maybe we are the last ones, more or less, Srđan being a couple of years older, Erëmirë and me being more or less the same generation, if I'm not wrong, but still, we are this, all of us are kind of this in-between generation. And basically, probably, we are the last one who still share at least the basic ground of the common world and of the basic urge, wish, and need to understand each other. If we don't start to work on that now, that might be lost for a long time, and that's where I see the hope and the perspective. The downside of that is this ideological bullshit, propaganda. Like there was a notorious saying of a famous Croatian academic that Serbian literature for us Croats today is not different from Bulgarian or Russian. I mean, if we need, and we are still, even if we are not aware of that, we are still thinking that way. That needs to be stopped immediately, and we are the ones who were supposed to be doing that.
Thank you, Marko. You put it really clearly and crystal clear what is going on and what we should fight. When the war started, when this last war started, I was desperate in Ljubljana, looking at the war from the outside, and I started learning Albanian with a woman who was so Yugoslav, so much Yugoslav that she couldn't stand anymore, and she fled away from Slovenia. So isn't this situation, Srđan, in which we live now, this crisis, isolation, all the problems we have with ourselves and with others, without touching, without drinking together, and so on and so on. Is this a situation good for us, any age, any profession, any situation, to go and learn some of the languages which are surrounding us? And how would you explain this? Let me put it in a different way. For me, Croatian and Serbian culture are the Gemini cultures, the twin cultures. They simply cannot exist one without the other.
Like the two of us.
Yeah. And of course, the problem is that how can you even think about translating? But of course, it's a good exercise. Let's make it ironical. And on the other hand, is this a moment really to wake up our desire to learn other languages and to speak other languages and to communicate with the others?
The translation should be imperative, not just for this day, not just for this epoch, for this time, for every time. And it's funny, we are talking about the translating and about the Albanian, and I'm currently editing a novel written by Fatos Ljubonja, Albanian writer, and we are publishing his novel in my own publishing house. And it's the second time we are doing the thing like this. The first one was the friend of ours, Arjan Leka, who is, I guess, the main character in Albanian literature, who is connecting the rest of Balkans with Albania. And when I was in Tirana 7 years ago, I went to the market and I wanted to buy groceries, something. And obviously, I'm not speaking Albanian. I asked the guy at the market about the prices. He asked me, "Are you from the States?" I said no. And he said, "Okay, you're from England?" I said, "No, I'm not from England." And he said, "Where the fuck are you came from?" And I said, "I'm from Belgrade." And he said, "Belgrade, Serbia, Lepa Brena. What is she doing? Is she singing? She's my idol." The guy in some bar who's not speaking English at all, when he heard that I'm from Serbia, I'm not from Belgrade, but it was easier to say I'm from Belgrade. His grandma is from Bosnia. He reserved the table for 30 days, for a month, for his special guest and his wife, for 30 days. What I wanted to say, we definitely are speaking the same language on Balkans. Marko knows, and you, Svetlana, know too. We all signed that petition of common language between Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, and Montenegro. And we are speaking the same language wider on whole Balkans, the same language of common Gemini histories. And we are not using that fact properly because we let those scumbags to manipulate with our differences, to insist on our differences, to make some political profit on our differences, to learn next generations. It's important for them to live on the back of that differences. And as far as I'm concerned, my struggle will be till the end of my life, devastating that differences. And translation is part of the process, one of the most important part of the process. Because I went to the, I don't know, Frankfurt Book Fair or Leipzig Book Fair. I met the guy from Kosovo who was president of some publishers association from Kosovo. And he asked me in Serbian, since he's 50 years old. He asked me if I can, he needed one book of stories, Andrić book of short stories. And he said, I want to translate it into Albanian. And I was fucking naive. I said, why you want to translate it? And he said to me, because no one who is 20 years, 25 years old, no one is speaking Serbian at all, not a single word. And that is a problem we all have. So yes, that is enormously important for all of us to learn the other languages and to translate as much as we can every single day.
Thank you so much, Srđan. I would introduce here, let's say, utopian perspective, which includes also gender, which we didn't mention. And this is the fact which was confirmed by the authors who from that time, that women from harems in Balkans, usually from Greece to let's say northern frontier, used to speak some 10 or even more languages. Inside their homes, they never move out, or very rarely. They were isolated and they were controlled. And they would speak, of course, Arabic for the Quran, Turkish, of course, and then they would speak European languages depending on the governors who would come for that season, and that is English, French, German, sometimes Italian, and then Serbian, which was also one of the diplomatic languages of the Turkish Empire. And then, of course, they would speak Albanian for the transport and any kind of mobility in the Balkans, which was run by Albanians. And then they would speak Ladino, because that was the fashion and the textile language. And then, of course, they would speak Greek, because they, for instance, lived in Greece, in Thessaloniki, and so on and so on. So isolated women spoke about, well, of course, there's a passion for literature of love, for love poetry too, and maybe some addition too. And the question is, why? Why so many languages? What purpose? And the only purpose that remains, that as an explication, is for pleasure. Could we reintroduce pleasure in what we do in the Balkans, what we do with languages in the Balkans and cultures in the Balkans? And I'm just reminding you that you have, let's say that would be your last intervention. So please, Erëmirë, what do you say about that?
I mean, even without going outside of Kosovo, I encounter many identities which have been shunned or have been marginalized because of where they stand in relation to grand narratives of after the war. And I find pleasure when I learn a lot about the Croat community diaspora in Kosovo, about Serb minorities in Kosovo, because it's a way of what you understand from it is that there was this great exchange, and exchange of experience and exchange of knowledge, and we were so rich that we failed for a very long time. We failed to see that exchange that took place, not naturally, but by different forces that brought different peoples coexisting within the same space. So when I do that, when I go out and research, and these people allow me into their lives and they talk to me, and because what I do, mostly I do oral histories, so I support these people to tell their life stories, and basically I together we weave their life narratives, and of course it's pleasurable, but it's so personally enriching, although it's not my culture, but it is still my culture, because I experience it as being shaped in dialogue with each other's cultures. And of course I recognize similarities, and even aspects which are not similar. They're just exciting to know that they didn't undergo the same way of fashioning it, or making it less important, or placing it somewhere culturally. I don't know. Yes, I would love to find a way. It's hopeful as a way of thinking to perceive the constructed other as something that it just opens up many possibilities of being in this a territory that is quite scored by divisions, and as Srjan pointed out, pretty much the differences have played role in creating a sense of identification for all these groups that inhabited this territory.
Marko.
I'm very happy that you brought this concept of pleasure and sheer joy out. I gotta say that I've been thinking about that a lot, and that is exactly probably the concept in which I try to lay most of my stock of hope into. We can, like, whether that production of art or a political struggle or daily life, okay, we might consider political struggle a duty, but it needs to be a pleasure to it. I think so. We can perceive production of art our personal mission and duty, but I really don't think it can be done on the satisfying level, and that it could be truly done without that kind of vague but still very palpable and very, very present formula and figure of pleasure and joy. There needs to be a touch of libidal to it, however you choose to define it. And I think this is exactly, this materializes a bit clearer now in this lockdown situation, while we are like, the situation is really outstanding for majority of us. We are kind of, we are, as the word says, we're locked in. Some of us really are. And I think it's very important to find that pleasure within yourself and kind of to insist of that, but it's not enough to find it within yourself. I think it's necessary to insist on the permanent exchange of that joy between you, the society, and the world. It is some kind of three-parted structure, and it can, of course, work without the component, the spice of pleasure or joy. But I think that this is really this je ne sais quoi that makes life life.
Thank you, Marko. And Srđan, you're the last to intervene.
I just wanted to sign his words. That's it.
Well, it was a really inspiring conversation. I'm really thankful to all of you. You gave me and we gave mutually to each other a huge load of ideas and huge load also possible techniques to take us out of this and to be active and to never forget about responsibility of wording and creating. So thank you all. Good night. Sleep if you can after this conversation. Lots of luck. Don't get sick, and try to create as much active joy as you can. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Svetlana, for having us, and bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everybody.